Right, good evening, gents. Nice to see quite a few of you here. The title of this little presentation is called Code Breaking, but it's actually really cryptography, and the back of it. And it's come about is that, as some of you know, I volunteer at the Fleet Air Arm Museum, and up until COVID struck, I was running code breaking workshops for school children. Some small, some not so small, and this is sort of bits of that workshop that I've cobbled together into a lecture. But what I've got to sort of talk about this evening is a little bit of the history of codes and ciphers, so that we can move on and quite quickly talk about the Enigma machine, because even though it's probably had more books written on it than Sherlock Holmes, you know, we know so much about it. It did revolutionise the science of cryptography. It dragged it out of the dark ages, where people used quill pens and things, into the electromechanical age, and it was still, or a derivative of it was still being used up until the late 1970s. So first of all, that's the subject. So it's going to be cryptography. That's really what it's all about. The word crypto comes from the Greek kryptos, meaning secret. So that's why we call it cryptography. But the two words that we hear bandied about regularly today is code or cipher. We've all got codes. We've got PIN codes, we've got barcodes. Everybody uses a code in their daily lives. We've got codes on our bank cards. But what is a code? What is a cipher? A code is just that. It's just something to represent something else. A group of figures, a group of letters. Doesn't matter what it is. A symbol even. Not necessarily that you want to protect the information. It's just maybe something for convenience. But a cipher is somewhat different. A cipher, you do want to protect the information, so that's where the military side of it comes in. The military use ciphers, and you encipher something or decipher something, encrypt or decrypt. And the code breaking bit comes in where, if you can imagine, you've got two armies, one side of the battlefield, one the other, and Army A wants to send a message to Army B by whatever means. The code breaking bit comes in the middle, because the enemy would like to find out what you're doing, and likewise we want to find out what they're doing. So there's two sides to the coin. Firstly, you want to protect your information, which means both entities must have some kind of key or cipher information. But you know, you're in the middle, you think, oh, I want to get hold of that, then I'll know what they're doing. So anybody got any idea, and I know some of you have seen the lecture before, when the first military ciphers were used?
World War II?
World War II?
World War
No,
I think it was
World War
War
What?
wasn't it? Yes.
Forward.
A little bit the Egyptian.
How about 2,500, 3,000 years ago?
It's got to be Egyptians then.
Yeah, Romans, ancient Greeks, Romans, they had codes and ciphers. One guy in particular, Julius Caesar, he loved it. It was a bit different then, intercepting messages, because Army A might have been in Germany, Army B might have been in France with the Romans. And if a messenger went from A to B, interception then was literally grabbing hold of somebody, hitting him over the head and dragging him back to the enemy camp, and either, you know, coercing him to tell all he knew. But if he was carrying a bit of paper with a message on, it had to be enciphered. So believe it or not, they had enciphering machines. And for those of you who've got grandchildren, this is a good trick. Think about the things they had available. they had plenty of wood, and they would have had a leather belt like that around their waist, usually with a sword or a scabbard on. This is one of Her Britannic Majesty's Navy knife belts. You probably recognise those, Les. So they had a device called a skitali, and it just really means the way of writing the message on the inside of a belt and wrapping it round a piece of tree. And any of you got, say, young grandchildren, they love this. And hopefully, well, that don't look too clever, does it? So just to prove that the device is, you have to set it upright, and that will come in later on when we look at Enigma. So there you've got a message. Attack will start at dawn on Tuesday. Signed, Caesar. So you need, and if you haven't got the bit of wood the right diameter, it don't work. Or it really doesn't work. But
3 weeks trying to find the right size tree.
yeah, you've got to get it. So that would have been written in some form of code. I mean, that's plain language. So yeah, that's a skitali, and by all accounts, they have been found at various archaeological digs. So that's probably about the earliest. So there's two types of ciphers we can use. First one is transposition. The transposition cipher is pretty basic. Pick up any daily newspaper and you'll find transposition ciphers being used on the puzzle page. And any of you who've done a word search, there's no prizes for guessing that. Very, very simple.
Let's go for a drink tonight.
Let's go for a drink tonight. Or even
Send rescue party.
send your rescue party tomorrow noon. Okay? That's you just basically you aren't doing anything with the text, you're just shuffling it around. And that is still used along with other methods. The other way is you could put in false information. You can, if you've got other words, other things that like null fills or blank bits. So with that in mind, so all you need to do is just
First and last out.
delete every other letter. You get send ammunition to all units. Fairly basic stuff, but it's you've got to start learning to think about, cryptographers are a breed. They sort of think differently to the rest of us. And then one more, bearing in mind that it's similar to the first one, but it's written slightly differently. And it's written, target destroyed, return to base. So what I point out here is that it's written in 5-letter groups. It's the way, and often if you Google Enigma and stuff about World War II, you'll see lots of German messages. Telegram, you're charged by the word. You need to know how many words. If you had to send an enciphered message over a commercial landline or a commercial radio, it would cost you. So keep the words down. So that's transposition ciphers, just moving about. fairly easy to crack. I say you see a lot of these in the paper. The next one is substitution, and this is the. Any of you were in the Boy Scouts, you remember doing codes and ciphers in the Boy Scouts, and we've got our basic alphabet, and all you do is you just substitute one letter for another. That's fairly simple. As long as both ends know which letters are which, you can pass your message. So, how many permutations do you think we can get out of 26 letters? 26 letters are 26.
26 to 25, and that's
100 million.
4 times 10 to the power of 26. Each oodles of figures. So, it's a lot. A very, very powerful method of deciphering then, because you've got lots of choices. And I mentioned Julius Caesar. Well, he had a very simple way of doing it. All he did was take the alphabet, and his cipher alphabet was just slid to the right or to the left by any number. So today we might be using that. We've slid our cipher alphabet 4 letters to the right. Tomorrow we might do it 10 letters to the right. And that's known as the Caesar shift. And that was in use up until, while we were still doing book ciphers. So those are the basics of code, and that's still the same today. So, knowing what we know about substitution ciphers, here's a story from history, because if you've got a good code breaker, somebody who can get into it, you can change the course of history. Elizabeth I, with Queen Bess as they call her, and her arch rival, Mary Queen of Scots, who met her demise. Now each of these two ladies had their own spy masters or their own sort of secretaries. Elizabeth I had Francis Walsingham, and he had a network of agents, and he was extremely Protestant, very armed Protestant, absolutely hated Catholics. These times, weren't as enlightened as now. And Mary Queen of Scots had Mr. Babington, and he plotted. So Mr. Babington and his cronies had to communicate with Mary Queen of Scots, who was under house arrest for most of her life. And how they communicated was by writing the messages in code, or in cipher, and these messages were rolled up inside the bung of a barrel of beer. And the drayman would then take the beer into the castle. The only thing was, the drayman was in the pay of Francis Walsingham. So a copy of every little message was actually got back to Queen Elizabeth's Walsingham. And he got the letters and he opened them. And he employed a man called Thomas Phillips to crack the code. By doing that, he got the information that he needed to convict Mary Queen of Scots of treason, and off with her head. So the code, there's a copy of Anthony Babington's code, or cipher, and that is that document is, I believe, in the Tower of London. When you look into it, he used, instead of using a letter, he used symbols, he used numbers as a direct translation for the alphabet, but he also used symbols for words, and that up there, nulls, they were blanks to fill in spaces. So it's quite a complicated cipher. So if you're a code breaker and you're presented with something like this, where do you start? Where do you start to look at a page of gobbledygook? Well, you start with something called frequency analysis, which is not nothing to do with spectrum analyzers. And I'm sure you'll know the answer to that question. Most common letter in the English language, E. And statistically, if you look at any passage of text, you'll find that you can draw up a bar graph that looks like something like that, which shows the prevalence of the letter E. I'm working on English. Different languages have different common letters. And yes, I know you can actually write a paragraph without any E's at all. It's been done, but as a general rule, E is the most common letter. So if you look at a page of cipher text and you've got lots of Z's, and you know it's English, the chances are that the Z's could be E's. So that's your start. It's just one of the starts. And then you look at, if you're a cryptographer, a code breaker, you've got things like common letter combinations, like TH occurs quite a lot in English. So you can use that. So the people that made codes, made ciphers, they obviously realised this and they wanted a way of getting around that problem to overcome this frequency analysis. And this chap came on the scene, Blaise Vigenère, and he was a Frenchman. And he came up with this idea in the sort of 1500s, and people were still using versions of this cipher right up until about 1900, the end of the 19th century. It's quite simply the alphabet written out 26 times. That's all it is. The alphabet written out 26 times on a grid square. The reason I'm showing you this is because this is effectively the start, the basis for the Enigma machine. This is what the man who invented the Enigma machine was based his system on. And it works not on a simple key like A is Z, B is X or anything like that. It works on a key word. So I've got a message here. I'm just going to show you the first word of this message, because in the words attack we've got 2 T's and 2 A's. So what we need to do is, if we used a simple substitution code, the A's would come out the same and the T's would come out the same. Today's keyword is links, and the first way, we just write the message down and then write the keyword underneath it, repeating the keyword over and over again. So having written that down, we then apply that to our grid by simply writing the keyword down the left hand side, and that will tell us which rows of the 26 rows we're going to use. That's all that keyword does. It tells us which rows out of all of those rows we're going to use. So the first letter of the message was an A, so we enter our plain text at the top. So A for the beginning of attack, we apply that to the first letter of the keyword. So the first letter of our enciphered message will be L. The next letter is a T. We then apply the T to the second letter of the keyword, which is a Y, which gives us an R. Now we've got another T, so that's the first A, the first T. The next T we're going to apply to the third letter of the keyword. So the next T comes out as a G. And then we've got another A, and that's going to go to the fourth letter of the keyword as an X. So we've got 4 different letters in our ciphertext. And then there's the C and the K, which starts the whole thing over again. So attack at dawn comes out like that. So you can see there that every time there's a letter A, it's a different letter.
Hi, sorry to move. Find a seat around there. No seat on this side, planning.
You don't want to wide it around?
Yeah, I don't want to.
Evening, everybody. Good evening. I have to confess, I fell asleep.
Don't do that. So, our ciphertext is gobbledygook. And to get back to that, you just write the keyword underneath the enciphered message, and that takes you back to attack at dawn. You go backwards through the grid. So we had a system there where every time we encipher a letter, it's going to come out as different. Anybody got any questions? If you've got a question, just sing out. So that gives us, we've got 2, I'm not going to go into any more code, there's hundreds of different types of cipher out there, but that's the basics of how enciphering and deciphering work. So I'm going to fast forward now to World War I and another historical event. The government of the UK established a code-breaking agency at the beginning of World War I, and it was set up in this building here, which is Old Admiralty Buildings in London, next to All Scars Parade, room 40. And Admiral Ewing set up a organisation there, and he got people in from all sorts of places, schoolmasters, clever bods to decipher the messages. Mainly the radio messages were mainly intercepted by the military, but the UK had access to every single telegram that passed across the shores, because every cable company every company that landed a cable in the UK, there was an Act of Parliament which set up that a copy of every cable that came through the country had to be sent to the Foreign Office, and it ended up there in room 40.
When you say cable, you mean like a teleprinter?
No,
Voice pattern?
no, cables,
Real telegram.
telegrams.
Oh right, yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's talking about the written word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, years ago you say, I'm going to send a wire, I'm
Yeah.
going to cable somebody some money.
That's
You're
right.
going to send a telegram. It went over, remember the Victorians built the cable system.
Oh yeah.
So this was stuff coming over the cable. If anybody came up and said, I want to pass it through the UK, you know, Foreign Ministry said, yeah, so I'll just have a copy of that.
Yeah.
So we know everything, we got everything that was flowing through, so it's quite a lot. That law has never been repealed. It's still in process today.
Yeah, but that's it, just it.
It's not,
We don't have telegrams now. How
no,
does it work from there on?
we've got mobile phones though.
We get that's GCHQ, somewhere different.
Well, yeah, I mean, times have moved on, but the concept of, I mean, it's easy with a radio. You just stick up an aerial, and you know, if people are passing stuff over cable, as 90% of the world's communications now passes over fibre optic cable. You can't hear fibre optic cable. So in 1917, the German Foreign Secretary sent a cable to Washington. Mr. Zimmerman sent a cable in Washington, sent a cable to Washington for onward routing to Mexico. And this is a copy of the message that went from Washington to Mexico. Bernstorff is the US ambassador. But this originated in Germany. Now, in 1917, most people were still using book ciphers. We had signal books rather than sophisticated codes. So if you look very carefully at that, you'll see some of those groups are 4 figures, some are 5 figures. And that would have been in a great big book. So you look up a number and it tells you what the word is. And sure enough, this book has been reconstituted by Room 40 and we have a translation of it. And I don't know if you could read that, but it basically says that Germany intends to start unrestricted submarine warfare. We're going to try and keep the United States neutral, but in the event of that not succeeding, we're going to make Mexico a proposal of an alliance. We'll make peace together, and with generous financial support from us, Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico and Arizona. The settlement in detail is left to you. So this is an invitation to Mexico to make war on the United States and generally create mayhem. You will inform the President, that's the President of Mexico, of the above, most secretly, as soon as the outbreak of war with the United States is certain. So there is a tale that the man who got into this was a man called Alistair Denniston, who became the leader of Bletchley Park in World War II, ran down the corridor to his boss, waving the translation of this, saying, if you want to get America into the war, there's your key. So that was one of the key things that brought America into the war and hastened the end of World War I. So that's another instance from history where good, and there are numerous ones, but there's just a couple. But at this time in 1917, we're still using handwritten ciphers. We're still using code books. And then along comes this beast. This, of course, as I'm sure you will all recognise, is a Enigma machine. It was invented by a man called Walter Scherbis in 1917. No, sorry, in the 1920s. He actually approached the German Admiralty in 1918 with a version of this, saying, how about using this? You know, but the German Admiralty said, no, we're going to stick with our signal books. That's fine, we don't want to do it. So what he did in the 1920s, he refined it and he marketed that primarily for business. So he started to sell it to banks and companies to protect their commercially sensitive information. And the heart of it, of course, is the rotors, the 3 rotors in the middle. With the lid off, you can see that there's 3 rotors there, and they are with 26 places. Essentially, what you've got there is 3 Vigenère ciphers side by side. because each rotor works, is enciphering again. But this is the first sign of engineering, technology, electronics, mechanics being used to create a cipher. Making it easier to encipher, making it easier to decipher. Now the German forces took it over and they used it throughout the war, Second World War.
When you press a key, do they all move round or just one?
One moves round. I'll come on to that in a minute.
Oh, right, okay.
And there's another one. Sometimes they were numbers rather than letters, but it was 26. So that is the heart of the machine. So how did it work?
Well, decipher that.
He's bored. He's bored. He knows it. There's an Enigma rotor taken to bits, blown up. Remember, these would have been made by hand. These would have all been made by hand. There's another one there. You can see all those little wires there. Fancy with a soldering iron? They've all been done by all hand soldered. Right. How was it all wired together?
That's a secret.
Watch the yellow dot. There's only 6 connections there. So you press the letter B, the current will flow round the first scrambler. It comes out the bottom, hopefully, if it works. Yeah, there it goes. So it goes through the second rotor, through the third rotor, hits the reflector, and then goes back via another route. And it illuminates the letter C. So you've pressed the B and it's illuminated C. Now when that happens, this rotor on the left will move round once. So you've then completely changed the circuitry. Now I can demonstrate that quite simply. I have here an Enigma machine. I wish. If you can find one of these, and they do say that a few years ago at the Friedrichshafen rallies, you would see bits of Enigma machines and so on. This is an Enigma simulator, but it's got all the basic components. These were built for the Fleet Air. These belong to the Fleet Air Arm Museum, but these were built for the Fleet Air Arm Museum, and I've sort of taken over custody of them. And the idea is that you can actually encipher a message on these. The idea was with 2 that you could get the school children. Oh, right. Yeah.
Lift it up a bit.
But I want these guys to see
I
it.
want to see it.
Oh, right. You know. Yeah, okay. So, if you can see that, we've got the keyboard, we've got a lamp board, we've got these letters up here represent the rotors, and I've got a 3-rotor machine here. And we've got the plug board on the bottom, which I'll come to in a minute. So if I press the letter C, the letter B illuminates, and if you notice the 3rd rotor has rotated by 1 position. If I press the letter C again, you'll notice the letter N has illuminated and the rotor's moved on. So every time I press the letter C, I'm getting a different letter. and that rotor will keep going round. Once it's clicked round 26 times, the next rotor will go round once. So it's going round and round and round like that. Quite long-winded. So after I've finished, do come up and have a play with these. They are a bit delicate. It's only 2 circuit boards, and these were published. These kits were made by Bletchley Park and the Bletchley Park Trust and the Crypto Museum in Holland. I don't know if you can still buy them, but they were called Enigma E's, and they were kits. But there's another one out there, the same. So, just how complicated was this machine? So that's just 6 wires. So let's have a look at the permutations. Well, first of all, you've got 3 rotors. So it's 26 by 26 by 26, which gives you 17,500 permutations. You've got 3 rotors, which you can arrange 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. You can move them around. Each machine was supplied with a set of 5 rotors, of which you could use 3 in any position. And then you had a plug board on the front, which further complicated things. 10 pairs out of 26, and if you put it all together, there is a figure actually missing from this slide of something like 150,000 million, which went on the plug board. But you're talking,
I'm going to
Illions,
read down on that.
you're not going to count. So there's the machine. That's what the guys have got. So now what about our poor little Fritz, who's out there in the Russian front, and he's got to send a message back from his trench? What's he got to do? The first thing he's got to do, and this is where it becomes, where Sherbius I think fell over, because he's made a machine which is so complicated that it's not that user-friendly. So here we are. You would have a page like that. That's a month's worth of settings. So you get that page out of your signal manual, and I'm just going to look at what all that means. So let's highlight 30. So today is the 30th. So the first column in that was the date. That's over there on the left hand side. Then you've got the rotor order. So today we're going to use rotor 1, 3 and 5 in that order. So you get out your 3 rotors, 1, 3 and 5, bang them in the machine. When they're in the machine, you've then got to move the slip rings on each rotor around to a certain position. So each rotor's got a slip ring. So you move rotor 1 to position 22, so you've got 26 different positions. So you've got to set your rotors up. That's the third column. Then you've got to set up your plug board. So you've got 10 little plugs and sockets. And then over here on the right, you've got 4 3-letter groups, and these indicate every 6 hours. So it's 24 hours. Every 6 hours you're supposed to change the start settings on your rotors. Keeping up so far? And then on top of that, every time you send a message, you're supposed to pull out 3 random letters from the back of your head and encipher that as the message key. Who said it was easy to be a signalman? Now, because it was that complicated, that played very nicely into the hands of the Allies, because Germans were lax. They sometimes didn't bother to change the settings here. So you got a message sent there, and then you got the same message sent with those. So that was brilliant, because you got two lots of settings.
And it was dog tired at the time.
He was dog tired. Oh, message key. Oh, well, I'll use my girlfriend's initials. It's easy, I can remember them. It was so complicated to set up. So, what did it look like in operation? Well, here's quite a famous photograph. This is General Hans Guderian. He's quite a famous general. He was in the army before the war. He went right the way through the war, and he became quite instrumental in setting up the West German army after the war. But he's in his command truck. You've got two cipher operators down here, one reading, one writing, and the Enigma machine. So you needed two people to operate the machine, because if you're busy pressing keys and reading letters off there, you need somebody to write it down for you. When you've enciphered your message, you then give it to your mate who sat next to you, who is the Sparky, who's going to transmit it in jolly old Morse code. So it's quite an involved process, and every time you see a picture of it in use, there's usually three around. So there's three of them stuck in a field somewhere. A van with a lovely looking radio set there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you notice they will have got their rifles, their gas masks and their tin hats with them as well. And this one is quite interesting. This is from the German archives. This is taken in March 1941, and we're on a U-boat. And this is a U-boat. There's a telephone and radio up there, and the Enigma is a three-rotor machine. The German Navy, Karl Dönitz, was a bit worried about Enigma, although he was shouted down by his superiors, but he did introduce another rotor. So we had now got a four-rotor machine. Anybody ever seen the film Enigma? Not the not the Benedict Cumberbatch one, the one before with Doug Ray Scott. He talks in there about shark. We started to read the U-boat codes, and we had a blackout when they went to four rotors, and it was quite difficult to get into it. But we got into it because when you actually look at a piece of text, you start using things like weather messages. Every Luftwaffe airfield sent a weather report every day, as Air Force stations do. Every day the message would start with weather report for 0600, whatever. So you knew what the plain text was going to be. So that gave you a lead into what you were expecting. You knew that this station was going to send. Right, you've probably all heard of the Y service. Y service came from the letters WI, so I'm reliably informed, wireless intercept. During World War I, most of the radio intercept was carried out by the Admiralty, the War Office, the police and the General Post Office. That would have been the cables. The police all had a big radio unit at Dollis Hill in London, and obviously the Navy and the Army. All traffic went to room 40. In World War II, a little bit different. Intercept, again, now carried out by the services, the police, the post office, the BBC monitoring service did some intercept work, and chiefly yourselves, volunteer interceptors. If you want to know more about the VIs, there's a very good book, the RSGB sell it, it's written by a guy called David Agrutat. He is the current GCHQ historian, and he's written quite a good history of that, and it talks about how guys like us were at home sitting there with our radios and passing all the traffic to PO Box 25 Barnet, that we now know where that is. So what was it like to listen to? Days when HF had a lot of signals. So we've got two young ladies there who are operating. I'm sure some of you will recognise the AR-88 there. Yes. But that's what a lot of it was, a wooden bench with two radios on it, connected up to an aerial farm. And yeah, when you look at some of the old photographs of places like Bow Manor, which was a big army intercept station, it basically was Nissen huts, wooden benches with a radio on it, and long hours. So the Allies have got a problem. How are we going to get into it? Well, we had a bit of help, actually. We did have a bit of help. This man, Gustave Bertrand, he was a Frenchman. He was a captain in the French army. He had served in France in the First World War, wounded, stayed in the army, and he'd come out, and he ended up in French military intelligence. His job in this would be in the 1920s. He was responsible for interception and decryption of foreign communications to the French government, or to the French military. And he was approached when he was by somebody from the German embassy in Paris. He was approached by this man, Hans Thilo Schmidt, who unfortunately met his demise in 1943. Now, he again had been in World War I, private soldier in the trenches, gone back to Germany, tried to make a living, wasn't that happy, and he had a brother. His brother had got a really good job in the German military encryption office, cipher office. So he said, "Oh no, I'll get my brother a job." So he ended up in there. Wages weren't that good, so he decided to offer some Enigma documents for sale. He contacted Mr. Bertrand, and he was given a code name by French intelligence, Ash, and quite a lot of stuff came over. Instruction manuals, operating procedures, the all-important key settings. So some of this was starting to come out. We did know about Enigma. We had an Enigma machine, but because the machine is useless on its own, unless you know how to set it up, unless you know what today's keys are, you're scuppered. So French and British cryptographers weren't making that much progress with Enigma, because we didn't have any machinery to deal with it. So as things were getting towards Second World War, Bertrand passed all the documents over to the Polish cipher. Now they were also monitoring the Germans, obviously, needed to, and they had a number of quite clever people. This guy, Marian Rajewski, he was a mathematician. and he had actually managed to decipher one complete Enigma message by hand on his own. It took him the best part of a year to do it, but he had managed, and he had a couple of other guys, a chap called Zygalski as well, and there was three of them, a trio, who were working, and obviously the Poles were obviously thinking about the invasion to come, and it was all passed over to them. They were working on it, and they actually worked out a machine, designed a machine, electromechanical machine, to recover these all-important daily settings. That's what you need. It's not the machine, you've got the machine, what you need to know is how to set it up. And they called the machine the bomber. Which, a derivation of which was used, designed by this guy, Alan Turing, and he called it the bomb. I'll show you a photograph of that in a minute. So at the beginning of World War II, there was a secret meeting between Polish, French and British codebreakers just south of Warsaw. And the idea was, July 39, we're only a few months away from the beginning of World War II. They realised they were going to be invaded. Let's get all this stuff out so that those that are left to carry on the fight can do it. So they met in just a little area south of it's Warsaw, in a wood. Bertrand and Rajewski eventually managed to escape to England along with their friends, and they carried on working on Enigma. Thilo Schmidt was discovered, captured and executed by the Germans. But it gave us a start. Turing got to work on it, and he devised this machine. And there's a working replica of that at Bletchley Park or in the Museum of Computing. Essentially what it is 36 Enigma machines, or a replica of 36 Enigma machines, and it's set up using a menu. Now I haven't got my head around the menu, but you need to be a bit of a boffin to do that. But the idea was that you set this thing running and all these wheels rotated. Apparently they're quite noisy. And when they stopped, that means there was a hit. The idea was that you could get those settings. I think I've got a picture, yeah, there's a picture of a replica. That's the replica that was, all of these are electromechanical contacts. If you look behind it, it's a rat's nest of wiring. Absolute rat's nest. All hand built. They were built by the British Tabulating Machine Company at Letchworth, just down the road from Bletchley Park, and they were farmed out all over around the sort of North London and around area. Lots of places had these.
Is it true that they destroyed all the machinery after the war?
Yes and no. Yes, all the bombs went after the war. The only two machines that were kept were the Colossus, but that's the subject of another talk.
Smash them all up.
Smash them all up. Yeah. So what the British did was, once you'd got those settings, once you had a stop, you went to the decoding room and you plugged it into that. This is the British equivalent of an Enigma. It is a rotor-based system. This was the British machine, because rotor-based ciphers weren't the sole thing of Germany. You know, lots of people had invented them, but the Enigma one was the one that was the most used. So these Type-X machines had been rewired to work like Enigmas. So you had an army of girls there typing away, and they typed in the German deciphered text once they set it up, and out came English, German plain text, which then went to translators for translation. And in some cases, at the end of the war, the British Admiralty had messages before the German Navy recipient. It was a whole mechanisation. About 60 people went north in 1939 to Bletchley to start the whole process. At the end of the war, there was over 10,000 people working there. So the Enigma machine was instrumental in bringing cryptography into the mechanised age. That's why it's so been written so much about. It's where it sits in the history of codes and ciphers. Is that it's suddenly we've gone from the science of which was usually seen before the war as something that gentlemen did. You know, you may have gone up to Cambridge or Oxford and what am I going to do? Oh, I know, I'll go and work for Codebreakers. You know, it's a good thing to do. So that was the operation during the war. Obviously, a lot of Enigmas were captured at the end of the war. What do you do with them? Right. Well, the first thing you do is you refurbish them, and then you sell them to other countries that you might want to be interested in their communications. And you end up with something like this. This is a KL7 cipher machine. This was the standard issue to the British Army, Air Force and Navy from, I would say, probably the early 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. The last message transmitted using it was 1983. It is essentially an Enigma machine. I used one of these for a number of years when I was in the services. You had a keyboard, you've got 8 rotors, very similar to the rotors that I showed you. They went in there. That box there came out with the rotors in. You've got a little printer here and a roll of paper which printed out either the deciphered text or the 5-letter groups. And the last message was transmitted on it using it in 1983 by the Canadians, and they had got and that's the message. Last message sent on this system using it's called a DONIS, cryptographic, built in America but used right the way throughout NATO. And I well remember many hours during the long night watches at sea changing those blooming rotors. Drove me out the wall. Because you didn't have to do just the British Navy ones, you had to do the NATO ones as well, because who knows, you might get a message in a NATO key, because we've been in NATO. So lots of those, and
How long did you have, Don? I mean, the 5 minutes on the hour or something like that?
No, all the keys changed at midnight.
Oh.
So you had essentially, for each machine, you had 2 or 3 sets of rotors. So by the time midnight came, you had all your new day's settings all set up. So you just put one set aside, put the new set in, and then took down the old set ready and the next day's watch would do the same. Yeah, key settings changed at midnight usually.
That would have been strategically, for an enemy, that would have been strategically an advantageous time to launch an attack, wouldn't it, midnight?
Yeah. But the thing is with Enigma, I mean, anything designed by man can be undone by man. Now, using this system, which was a refined version of that system, we were not allowed to create a message of more than 1,200 groups, because you start getting repeats, and repeats in an enciphered message, cryptographers love it. One big weakness with Enigma, it could never encipher a letter as itself, and that opened a big door. And you know, if you Google Enigma, you know, there's reams and reams of information out there. That's that's as far as the Enigma bit goes. I've got, if you're not entirely board rigid, I've been talking for about an hour. I've got a little bit on how it was used for in the Battle of the Atlantic with some direction finding. If you're happy to go on, carry on. Okay, the biggest battle of the Second World War was the Battle of the Atlantic. It lasted for the entire war, and it was the one that Churchill was really, really worried about because we were being brought to our knees virtually. So, as Germany extended across Europe, they were taking over all these large transmitter sites. They had their own, but they had all the ones in France as well. And these threw out lots and lots of messages to the German Navy. So in the Atlantic, you had wolf packs operating, U-boats. And the German Naval High Command communicated with U-boat wolf packs using HF and VLF. Now, one of the things with VLF, as you will all know, is that HF goes via the ionosphere, but VLF goes over the surface of the Earth. You can read VLF transmissions down to about 50 feet underwater. So that's, you're pushing it there. So periscope, submarines have to come to periscope depth, and they don't like doing that. Submariners don't like exposing themselves. But all these messages were being transmitted, and they were being told, hopefully, where the convoys were. Remember, the convoys are coming across daily, like the M5. So in the UK, we had some intercept stations, just a few. If you actually look at some of there's various maps, but that just gives you some idea of where we had. Why have we got one up here? And why have we got one down here? Because you've got a nice broad baseline for direction finding. Triangulate.
Right.
Because I mean, it's not just the German Navy we're listening to, we're also listening to what's going on the continent. We even had an intercept station down in Torquay. A little station intercepting VHF communications, which was the Luftwaffe. So we knew what the pilots were saying on the way over. So all of the traffic was then passed to jolly old Bletchley Park. It was called, in the 20s, and when it went there, it was called the Government Code and Cipher School, after Room 40, or the Golf, Cheese and Chess Society. That's the nickname. Government Code and Cipher School. The name was changed to GCHQ at the end of the war. So once all the stuff had been decrypted, it needed to be analysed, collated. You've got lots of intelligence there, and the sorts of material would range from position reports, weather reports, a list of spares to be picked up next time you got back to Brest, all sorts of stuff. But it all ended up down here, as far as the Battle of the Atlantic was concerned, at the Admiralty Operational Intelligence Centre in Old Admiralty buildings, where it was plotted and collated. And provided you had some information, you could then send that out to, in your own cipher, to your convoy escort commander and convoy commodore, who would reroute convoys. That was the whole idea, to protect the convoy, to get the convoy going somewhere different. Moving it around. And we could actually DF some of the contacts in in the convoys. So what's it like out there on a convoy? You've been told that there are U-boats in your area, take evasive action. U-boats, one U-boat on his own, looks there, up the periscope, convoy in sight. What does he want? He wants his mates. He can't tack on his own, you know, you've got 50, 60 ships filling the horizon, all big fat juicy targets. Let's get some help here. So he has to surface and send an enemy sighting report. So he's breaking radio silence. So you're sitting on your little Corvette looking at one of these. Receiver outfit FH4. You've got an HF receiver, 1 to 24 megs. This was absolute state of the art, very, very secret, with a cathode ray tube in the middle. The outer ring of the cathode ray tube was slaved to the ship's gyro compass. So as the ship turned, there was a little motor in here which drove that round. You had a main tuning dial there. You had a sense switch there. So these controls were very useful. How do I know all that? It was in service up until 1980. I went to sea first in 1966, and my first job was using one of these. And it said on there, you know, Admiralty pattern receiver, 1945. I had an opportunity to buy one once, and I never took it up. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the money. You know, I had bigger demands on my money, like two small children. That photograph is taken on board HMS Belfast.
Is it still on HMS Belfast?
Yes.
Have they closed the radio room down on Belfast?
The RNARS are not allowed to operate from there.
I know there was something.
Yeah, they've been told to. You know, it used to be the Royal Navy Amateur Radio Society had a London group, and they used to operate GB2RN regularly.
Yeah.
Some of you may have worked them. So this was what it looked like when it was installed on a Flower class Corvette. Spot the CR100. Yes. This is taken from a website run by somebody called Jerry Prop, Canadian. He's written reams and reams on this. But this would have been a little cubby hole. The power supply for the receivers there. This is the important thing. This is your aerial transfer box here. These 4 leads going up here are to your loop aerial, which is on top. Port and starboard loop, fore and aft loop, and also the sense aerial. And the length of those was critical. They had to be absolutely exactly the same length. So you were sit there listening on the U-boat frequencies. You've got a voice pipe here, communications. You've got a microphone here to scream into that you've got a U-boat. So there you are, bouncing around in the North Atlantic. And the other end of that radio, you've got one of these. This is a Bellini Tosi S25B loop antenna, frame antenna. Now, in there, you've got a lot of support structure, but basically you've got 2 loops, fore and aft, port and starboard, and in the middle, sense aerial. So, if your signal is on the fore and aft loop, you get, on your cathode ray tube, you get an up and down ellipse. If it's on the port and starboard loop, it's that way. So if it's halfway in between, it's going across that way. Your job as the operator is to say, well, is it coming from that direction or that direction. So if it's going up and down, you don't know whether it's going north or south. That's where the sense aerial comes in. Because what it does is it switches out one loop and switches in the sense aerial, which highlights the... So, there you are, sitting in front of your receiver. Hopefully, you'll be able to take a bearing of it. Oh. Sorry folks, there's an animation there and it's not worked. I do beg your pardon, there was an animation there. But your signal would have come up as an ellipse there, and you would have flicked that switch first one way, then the other, and as the signal was going, it would have come up there and there, which would have told you that the bearing was there. So you've DF'd the submarine, and bear in mind, an enemy report, contact report, probably didn't last more than about 20 seconds. Literally, call sign, this is call sign, couple of groups down. And then you would report that to your convoy commodore. He would then say, okay, there's the convoy, there's the escorts. I've got 2 HFDF fitted ships. Take a bearing, triangulate, how am I going to deal with that submarine? Am I going to send and detach an escort? Have I got a carrier with me? I could launch a plane to bomb it. So that's how the Enigma with high frequency direction finding could actually get the thing. That's it guys.
Well done, Rob.
Well
Is that
done.
all right?